They saw him and decided his place before he said a word. A man defined by the color of his skin, carrying a calm that only years of quiet endurance can forge. In a world built to exclude, his presence alone stirred unease, triggering chains of suspicion and prejudice that moved faster than reason. What unfolded was a merciless unraveling, a crescendo of silent cruelty and unseen battles fought in shadows. But beneath the surface of this orchestrated humiliation lies a secret so profound it will shatter everything they thought they knew. This is not just a story of discrimination. It's a reckoning waiting to ignite. If you want to witness the moment when the hunted becomes the judge, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters in this fight. The morning inside Wells Meridian Bank was sterilized to perfection, air-chilled to corporate standards, lemon clean with a hint of sage, and blanketed in the subtle notes of instrumental jazz that danced along the marble floor like whispers of wealth. The sun filtered through tall glass windows, casting precise lines of light across carefully arranged potted palms and magazine stands stocked with Forbes, Business Insider, and travel brochures to Santorini. The space was designed to make the right people feel welcome and others, those who didn't quite fit, a little too aware of where they stood. Alaric Boone stood still as he crossed the threshold, his steps slow and deliberate, the firm click of his cane masked by the polished silence. His wool coat hung from his frame with quiet dignity, aged but well kept. His hat rested low over his brow, shadowing the sharpness in his eyes and the curve of his mouth that neither smiled nor frowned. He wasn't poor, he wasn't homeless, but he wasn't supposed to be here, or so the room decided the moment he entered. Jerry Dalka, the head of security, noticed him before the automatic door fully closed. Jerry leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowing. He had a buzz cut like a bulldog and a gut that had grown alongside his authority. His thumb reached toward the console, flipping off the facial recognition system. Boone's profile, had it registered, would have been flagged green. Instead, the system saw nothing. To the cameras, he didn't exist. Jerry muttered under his breath to his partner beside him, a bored guy named Tate. No need to waste AI on this guy. They chuckled. It wasn't the first time they'd manually override the system to mess with someone who didn't look right. Jerry's eyes followed Boone as he paused at the investment chart. That's where it started. Too long at the wall, too still, too deliberate. Suspicion wasn't based on action, it was based on presence. Meanwhile, across the waiting area, a woman in white slacks and a pearl cardigan leaned over and retched into a trash can. Two staffers rushed to help her, escorting her gently to a seat, bringing water and tissues, asking if she needed a ride home. Boone, meanwhile, stepped toward the customer kiosk and tapped the screen. It flickered red, temporarily disabled. Jerry had locked it before Boone even got near. Boone remained calm, turned slightly to observe the information wall again. Jerry opened the bank's internal app and flagged him. Suspicious lingerer, possible loiterer, flag for pattern behavior. Lyle Braddock, assistant account manager, was notified instantly. Lyle didn't ask questions. He just saw Boone, old, black, quiet, and assumed the rest. Boone remained still, unmoving, reading, waiting. When Lyle walked over, he didn't greet him. He positioned himself like a bouncer at a nightclub, chest puffed, clipboard close, pen poised like a weapon. "Need help?" he asked in that dry tone that didn't care for an answer. Boone turned politely, replied with a calm explanation. He was here to inquire about legacy trust certifications. Lyle blinked, fake smiled, and said he'd check who was available, then disappeared into the hallway and never returned. Boone didn't fidget. He simply turned back toward the information display. Jerry now stood. He didn't move quickly. He didn't speak. He just started walking in a slow circle that edged closer to Boone's position, each step loud enough to echo against the marble floor. To others, it looked like a casual patrol. To Boone, it was a perimeter. Jerry activated a geofence from his phone. Boone's location now had a 10-foot radius alert. If he moved beyond it, an automatic security ping would trigger. Boone adjusted the cuff of his coat and reached for a brochure. A child pointed at him. The mother whispered and pulled her closer. Behind the counters, a teller leaned in to her colleague, nodding toward Boone. Whisper, snicker, glance. It spread like oil on water, thin, fast, and without a sound. Boone turned a page in the brochure. Jerry was now beside him. Close. Too close. Boone felt the presence before he heard the breath. Jerry spoke without turning. You lost, sir? Boone replied, eyes forward, waiting for someone from private wealth. Jerry snorted. Not sure they're taking walk-ins. A pause. Boone did not move. Jerry stared at the cane, then the shoes, then the face. Mind stepping back from the display. Boone didn't argue. He stepped back. Jerry radioed in. Subject non-compliant. Advising visual verification. Lyle, sipping coffee 2 rooms over, grinned. Escalate it if you need to. Boone moved to another part of the lobby, this time to the brochures about retirement planning. 2 security cameras shifted silently to follow. Boone noticed. He felt it. Surveillance wasn't new to him. He'd seen it in many forms, in many places. This wasn't surveillance. This was humiliation under fluorescent lights. A man in his 40s adjusted his collar and whispered to the teller, "Is he casing a place?" She shrugged. "He's been here a while." Jerry approached again, his tone flat, almost clinical. "Sir, are you planning to conduct a transaction?" Boone glanced at him. "I've asked for someone." Jerry smiled without warmth. "Not how we do things. You're not on the list." Boone did not reply. Jerry continued, "We have policies about lingering without appointments. For safety." Boone met his eyes, said nothing. Jerry didn't like silence. Silence made him feel exposed. Boone's quiet refusal to resist made Jerry's chest tighten with a need to provoke. "You smell like a bus station," he muttered, just loud enough. Boone blinked. He didn't react. That enraged Jerry more than shouting ever could. Jerry opened his tablet, flagged Boone as non-client escalation. That label would strip privileges, slow service, and blacklist his name from priority systems. Meanwhile, Lyle returned from his break and glanced at the screen. "Still here?" he asked. "Thought you'd move him by now." The temperature felt colder, not in degrees, but in reception. Clients nearby leaned away slightly, stealing glances that disguised fear as curiosity. Bank employees passed without meeting his eyes, and every footstep behind him felt louder than it should have been. His stillness seemed to aggravate the very system that had turned against him. Jerry, standing just beyond his shoulder now, took one slow step forward, then another, until he was close enough that Boone could feel his breath on his temple. Boone didn't flinch, but the message was clear. He was being herded without a word. The brochure was gently folded, placed back into its slot. He turned, ready to relocate somewhere quieter in the lobby, maybe nearer the front desk where visibility was higher, where cameras would surely record what unfolded. But as he moved, Jerry's foot extended just enough to catch Boone's. It wasn't an accident. Boone's cane hit the marble and skidded sideways. His knee bent sharply, and the old leather of his coat slapped the floor as he dropped. A sharp thud echoed, then a collective inhale from 2 customers nearby. The sound Boone made was small, a stifled breath, a swallowed grunt. Pain bit through his knee and wrist as he caught himself. Jerry stood over him with a practiced blank face. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't reach for the cane. He just stared. "Sir, please watch where you're going," Jerry said, his voice measured. Boone pulled himself up slowly, refusing help from anyone, even though none was offered. His hands trembled briefly, not from fear, but from the blunt ache that now radiated through the side of his leg. He reached for his cane, which Jerry had nudged a few inches away with the side of his boot. Boone leaned down, retrieved it, and straightened with dignity, though the sharp edge of pain stayed in his eyes. Lyle, who had been observing from across the teller line, approached with a grin that pretended concern. "Everything all right here?" he asked, already knowing the answer he would accept. Jerry shrugged. He stumbled. "Nothing unusual." Boone met Lyle's eyes, said nothing. Lyle nodded as if that silence was agreement, then walked off. Boone turned and took a slow step toward the information counter, where he hoped anyone, would treat him as a client. As he walked, He noticed the digital screens above the service desks, now showing a flashing yellow bar across the top. Service delays due to technical adjustments. It wasn't true. It was a tactic. Jerry had activated the queue suppression protocol. Boone would not be called to a desk. No number would appear for him. The system now recognized him only as an internal tag, awaiting risk review. He sat on a small bench beneath the digital display, adjusting his coat, folding it over his lap. From his left, he heard a whisper. A young man in a gray hoodie leaned toward the woman next to him. "He's been here for like 20 minutes, the young man said. "Why hasn't anyone kicked him out yet?" The woman replied softly, "I think they're just waiting for him to try something." Boone heard every word. He'd heard variations of them before, in train stations, department stores, once at a voting booth. The language always shifted, but the message never did. His presence was treated as a threat even in the absence of action. He adjusted his cuff and sat taller. A security notification pinged in Jerry's earpiece. Boone's geofence had registered a brief deviation when he fell. Jerry cleared it with a swipe and made another notation in the incident log. Client appeared unbalanced. Possible substance impairment. No breath detected. No slur. No erratic movement. But the narrative had already been entered. Boone sat quietly, his eyes on the display ahead. The laminated financial flyers had all been removed from the shelf near him. He hadn't seen anyone take them. They had simply disappeared sometime after he arrived. This was part of the process. Remove access to information, isolate from interaction, surround with implication. From across the room, two junior tellers stood near the printer, pretending to collate papers while watching him. One took out a phone and snapped a photo before being nudged to stop. Boone turned his head slightly and met their eyes. They looked away instantly. Jerry returned. "Sir," he said, "if you're not conducting business, we may need to ask you to step outside." Boone raised his hand slightly. "I'm waiting," he said softly. "No one's responded to my request." Jerry shrugged. "We're very busy today." Behind Boone, 3 of the 6 desks sat empty. No one called him forward. No one addressed his presence. Boone remained seated. He crossed one leg over the other, not to rest, but to slow the throbbing in his knee. He was being denied attention so they could justify removal. That was the tactic. Deny service, then punish for inaction. Minutes passed. No number. No approach. A customer entered, wearing a wrinkled hoodie, earbuds blasting music. He wandered near Boone, stood within a foot of him, then veered off. No one stopped him. No one asked him anything. Jerry didn't flinch. Boone watched silently. A few minutes later, a maintenance cart was rolled out to the area where Boone sat. A tall man in a blue vest stopped just beside him, looked down, and said, "We need to sanitize this bench." Policy. Boone blinked. "I haven't moved," he said. The man replied, "Exactly." Boone stood slowly. The janitor sprayed the bench aggressively, eyes locked forward. As Boone turned to relocate, he saw the puddle trail that had not been wiped from the vomiting woman's area still untouched. The message was clear. Boone stood now, cane in hand, no longer permitted to sit, no longer permitted to wait. He became motion. He became a problem in circulation. He was made into friction. Staff began redirecting other clients away from him as they passed. One man stared too long and was gently guided by Jerry to another line. "He's just waiting for a transfer," Jerry lied. "Shouldn't take long." Across the lobby, Jerry remained seated now behind his desk, but his eyes never drifted from Boone. He had done enough in the last 30 minutes to set the tone, and now it was the others' turn to continue what he had started. At the far side of the room, Lyle stood at the teller line, casually flipping through a file folder he wasn't really reading, while keeping Boone well within his peripheral vision. He smirked and spoke to a junior teller beside him named Carly, a college intern working her second week at the branch. "That's him," Lyle whispered, "the one Jerry told you about. Watch him. He's been here almost an hour, probably waiting to start some drama." Carly looked up hesitantly. She was new, uncertain, unsure of what to say. But when she saw Boone still standing near the edge of the waiting area, alone, unmoving, she said nothing. Lyle continued, "Don't make eye contact. These types are always looking for a reason to escalate. Play it safe, yeah." Carly nodded without answering, her expression blank. Moments later, she received a message on her work tablet. "Flag Booth 3 for deep cleaning after subject leaves. Sanitize all surfaces. No contact." Boone hadn't touched a single surface since entering the bank, yet the implication traveled faster than truth. Meanwhile, in the operations room adjacent to the teller floor, 2 other employees sat before a bank of monitors reviewing transactions and internal notes. One of them, a wiry man named Brennan, paused a security feed and zoomed in on Boone. "He's still here?" he asked, laughing. His coworker, Marcia, rolled her eyes. Jerry tagged him early. Risk assessments lit up like a damn Christmas tree. You'd think he was planning a robbery with how much heat he's got. Brennan nodded, amused. "Is this the guy who asked about private wealth?" Marcia snorted. "Yeah, real Rockefeller, huh?" They both laughed. Brennan, wanting to add to the fun, copied a still image of Boone's security cam photo and pasted it into a shared team group chat titled Wealth Watch. The caption, "Legacy Trust or Lunch Loiterer?" The image got 4 laughing emojis and 1 from someone in IT. None of them considered for a second that they had just turned a human being into office entertainment. Boone remained unaware of the message thread, but he could feel the shift in how people looked at him. Each interaction had shrunk in warmth. Each passing glance came loaded with hesitation or mockery or fear. Not a single staff member had approached him with sincerity since Lyle had walked away earlier. He was now something to observe, not engage. A white man in a Patagonia jacket stepped up to the desk beside Boone and was greeted instantly. He had no appointment. He hadn't filled out any forms. But within 2 minutes, he had been led to a private desk in the back and offered coffee. Boone watched the exchange in silence. Jerry stood once more and crossed the lobby at an angle, this time speaking in hushed tones to another guard who had just come on shift, a younger man named Reese with nervous energy and a military haircut. Jerry leaned close and murmured, "Don't let him get too comfortable. If he sits again, we move him. Keep eyes. Don't make it obvious." Reese nodded quickly, trying to hide his discomfort. He wasn't sure what exactly Boone had done, but he wasn't about to question Jerry's authority. From that point forward, every movement Boone made was shadowed. When he reached into his coat for a handkerchief, Reese adjusted his belt. When Boone pulled out a pair of reading glasses to scan the bulletin board, Reese shifted closer, hand on his hip. Across the room, Lyle returned to his station and spoke to Carly again. "Here's a fun task," he said, pulling a sheet from the printer. "I want you to practice a difficult customer response. Pretend this guy here," he pointed toward Boone without subtlety, "is trying to cash a fake check. Walk through how you'd handle it." Carly blinked. "Is that real?" she asked. "No," Lyle said, laughing. "But it's the kind of thing we train for. Never know when someone will snap. This guy fits the profile, doesn't he?" Carly didn't answer. She looked over at Boone, who was now reading the fine print on a laminated info card attached to the wall, and nodded once, unsure whether to feel guilty or professional. The role play began anyway. Lyle instructed her to rehearse asking Boone for a second form of ID, then how to tell him his account was flagged, then how to call security discreetly. The whole time, Boone stood 20 feet away, unaware that he had become a live exercise in suspicion. Upstairs in the manager's office, Renata saw Boone on the overhead monitor and didn't even ask what was happening. She saw the color-coded flags on his profile and assumed Jerry was handling it. "Keep an eye on him," she texted Jerry. "No headlines today. We're under audit next week." Jerry replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Boone shifted slightly, leaning harder on his cane, his knee growing stiff from a cold. He was tired now, not just from standing, but from the accumulation of glances, the swarm of whispers, the way each new employee passed by pretending he wasn't there, except to confirm with their eyes that he still was. His presence had become the punchline to an internal joke that no one said out loud. They didn't have to. The laughter was already buried in their posture, in their diverted eyes, in the cautious distance they maintained as if he carried something contagious. The message rippled through the bank's operations like a shadow, unseen but immediately felt. Boone had not raised his voice, had not attempted access beyond permitted areas, had not once disobeyed instructions. Still, this status change activated a set of behavioral responses designed to resolve invisible disruptions. Within minutes, 2 junior guards emerged from a back hallway, both walking with that exaggerated stiffness common to people performing authority. Boone turned slightly, sensing the shift behind him. The monitors overhead changed again, their scrolling text now displaying a generic alert about upgraded safety policies. It was meaningless, but it gave the watching customers something to assign their confusion to. One of the guards, a tall man with a shaved head named Riley, stepped forward and tapped Boone on the shoulder. Not hard, but not gently either. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us," Riley said, his voice stiff, rehearsed. Boone turned, confused but calm. "I'm waiting for someone in private banking," he replied, voice even. Riley didn't respond. The other guard, shorter and wide-shouldered, moved to Boone's other side. "Please comply. We've received multiple reports of you making customers uncomfortable." The word "reports" landed like a gavel. No specifics, no accusations, just a vague collective complaint that no one had actually filed, but everyone was now conditioned to believe. Boone looked from one guard to the other, saw the lack of uncertainty in their eyes, and realized they weren't offering a request. They were reciting procedure. He nodded once and began moving with them. The small movement caused a nearby woman to flinch dramatically and whisper something to her companion. A man across the room pulled his daughter closer, as if Boone's measured steps had suddenly become a threat. As the guards escorted Boone toward a side hallway, a third man emerged carrying a handheld scanner and a clipboard. "Wait," he said, gesturing to a bench beneath the central display. "Have him sit there first. We need visual confirmation from risk compliance." Boone didn't resist. He sat slowly, folding his coat across his lap. But then came the final insult. Riley pulled a sheet of paper from his belt pouch, unfolded it, and handed it to Boone. It was a printed sign, all caps, black ink, awaiting criminal verification. "Hold this in your lap, please," the guard said. Boone looked at it for a long moment, then placed it across his knees without a word. Around the room, phones began to rise, not from staff, but from customers who now felt justified in their assumptions. To them, this wasn't injustice. This was confirmation. A black man, elderly or not, singled out, made to sit with a printed label that marked him as a potential threat. Jerry stood back with folded arms, watching like a stage director who knew a scene was playing out perfectly. No one needed to touch Boone now. The visual alone would do the rest. A teller approached her manager with a hushed concern about the optics, but Renata dismissed it with a wave. "He's not in custody. He's just being checked." No one questioned why a man who had committed no crime, made no scene, and followed every direction was being labeled a criminal in waiting. It was easier to believe the sign than question the process that led to it. 10 minutes passed. No one came to verify anything. No one spoke to Boone again. He sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor. The ache in his knee had grown sharper, but he didn't move. He kept the paper across his lap, like a badge of dishonor someone else had pinned on him. Children stared. A woman took a photo from behind a column. The 2 junior guards loitered near the exit now, laughing quietly between themselves. Meanwhile, a staffer in HR pulled up Boone's image and sent it to an internal training thread labeled Crisis Prevention Simulation. Example of potential instigator. The caption read, "Evaluate posture, hand placement, stress indicators." Another emoji. Another laugh. Upstairs, Renata fielded a message from headquarters. They had noticed a spike in watch-flagged activity on the local terminal. She minimized the alert, marked it reviewed, and continued her lunch. Boone, from his low position on the bench, remained still. His breath had slowed, his shoulders square but tired. The moment hadn't passed, it had calcified. The idea of him as a threat was now permanent in the space, absorbed into the lobby's atmosphere like residue. It would linger even after he left, and he knew it. He saw it in the eyes of the employees who pretended to glance at wall clocks as they looked down on him. He saw it in the way security positioned themselves at angles designed not to intervene, but to isolate. He saw it in the discomfort of customers who weren't sure whether they were witnessing a situation or a policy. Boone wasn't crying. He wasn't trembling. But something deeper had shifted. A quiet humiliation was crawling up from his chest into his throat, the kind that doesn't demand justice, only endurance. He had known moments like this before in offices, hotels, airports. But this one felt designed, not accidental. It wasn't just one man's prejudice, it was an orchestra. He had not spoken since being forced to hold a sign, had not stood, had not protested. And still, he felt the tension rising, not just within himself, but in the way the staff and security moved, like animals circling a prey they'd already wounded and were now trying to finish. Jerry remained seated with a smug expression, arms folded, watching Boone like a project successfully executed. Across the floor, Riley and the second junior guard returned to their station, leaving Boone alone, but still visibly marked, still completely vulnerable. Boone's knees ached, his back stiffened, and the lights overhead buzzed slightly as if joining the slow dismantling of his composure. A whisper from behind the teller line broke the stillness, followed by snickering. Lyle leaned over to Carly and muttered something neither of them wanted Boone to hear, but he heard it anyway. It was about his clothes this time. The word "smells like mothballs" drifted just loud enough to sting. Carly giggled, though her eyes darted toward Boone with a flicker of shame. Still, she said nothing. Still, she laughed. Boone took a slow breath, steadying himself, knowing the moment he reacted to any of it, they would win. The bench was cold. His pride was colder. The pain in his knee pulsed harder now, not because of injury, but because of the growing weight pressing down on his entire body, a weight built from the indifference of systems and the enthusiasm of small-minded people given authority. Then it happened. 2 new customers entered the bank, a married couple by the look of them, middle-aged, dressed neatly, speaking softly. They were white. As they walked past Boone, the man paused, confused by the sign. His eyes narrowed, then widened. "Wait," he said to his wife, "is that necessary?" His voice wasn't angry, but curious, skeptical. It was the first time someone had questioned the scene out loud. Jerry heard it. So did Lyle. Everyone in the vicinity tensed slightly. Jerry stood slowly and approached the couple. "Everything all right, folks?" he asked with his practiced smile. The man gestured toward Boone. "That man's been sitting there a while. What's with the sign?" Jerry didn't miss a beat. "Standard procedure. We had a minor incident earlier. Nothing to worry about. No one was hurt." The implication was skillfully layered. Boone had caused something, maybe violent, maybe aggressive, and now they were simply following protocol. The wife glanced at Boone again. "He doesn't look dangerous," she said, half to her husband, half to Jerry. Jerry leaned in a little, lowered his voice like a friend sharing a secret. "Ma'am, not everything is as it seems. We have to follow the proper channels for everyone's safety." The couple, sufficiently soothed by the vague assurance of order, nodded and walked toward the check-in station. Boone had heard every word. It wasn't the worst thing said that day, not by far, but it struck something deeper, not because it was cruel, but because it was so calm, so professional, so rehearsed. It was the polished veneer of oppression, coated in words like safety and protocol and policy. He looked down at the sign again, then at his hands resting atop his cane. He had been patient. He had allowed them to strip his dignity layer by layer without response, trusting that restraint would shield him from escalation. But it hadn't. The more he complied, the more they filled the silence with their own fiction. Across the floor, a tall woman in a navy blazer exited an office and made her way toward the bench. Her name tag read Operations Director. Her name was Simone West. She approached with a tablet in one hand, glancing between Boone and the data in her display. She stopped in front of him and cleared her throat. "Sir," she said coolly, "we've reviewed the logs, and it appears there may have been a miscommunication earlier regarding your intent." Boone looked up slowly, his face unreadable. Simone continued, "We can't seem to locate your appointment in the system. Can you confirm that you had a scheduled meeting with Private Wealth Management today?" Her tone was formal, stripped of empathy. Boone's voice came low and even. "I asked to speak with someone regarding a legacy trust certification. I was told someone would see me." Simone nodded, tapping something into her tablet. "Unfortunately, we only accept such consultations by appointment. Without verification, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to reschedule and return another day." Boone stared at her for a long moment. "You never gave me a chance to make the appointment." Simone blinked. "Sir, our team followed all procedures. If you were misdirected, I do apologize, but our policy does not allow loitering under uncertain client status." He stood slowly, the cane pressing hard against the marble. "So this is how it ends," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Simone didn't respond. Jerry stepped in beside her now, his hands clasped in front of him like a podium preacher. "We're happy to escort you out now, Mr. Boone," he said, emphasizing the happy, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Boone looked at them both, then glanced around the room. Every eye was watching, not curious now, expectant. He was no longer a man to them. He was a performance coming to its final cue. He had tried patience. He had tried silence. He had tried dignity, and none of it had been enough. He picked up the sign from his lap and held it up. "This?" he asked. He walked slowly toward the corner of the block, passing the tall hedge that framed the side of the bank's property, the cane tapping lightly against the concrete like a pulse too proud to falter. Every step hurt now, not just because of the fall or the long stand, but because of the weight of humiliation pressing into his joints, echoing through muscle memory, turning pain into permanence. Boone paused near the intersection, standing beneath the shade of a flickering traffic light, staring forward as if searching for something distant and invisible. He could still feel Jerry's smirk, still hear Simone's clipped, polished tone, still see the look in Lyle's eyes, the way all of them had performed their roles in harmony, pretending professionalism while orchestrating cruelty. That performance had been perfected over time. It wasn't about rage or noise. It was about subtle corrosion, the practiced erosion of humanity until the victim became an object, a file, a risk flag, a potential incident to be quietly removed. Boone's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar, not from fear, but from restraint held for too long. He could still feel the paper sign on his lap, phantom weight etched in memory, as if the words had burned through fabric into skin. A passerby brushed his shoulder accidentally and offered a quick apology, snapping Boone out of his spiral. He nodded, offering a faint smile, and kept walking. His destination wasn't far. A narrow alley sat between the bank and a smaller corporate office, unassuming, shaded, invisible to the public eye. Boone slipped into it like smoke, disappearing from view in seconds. From the far side, a delivery truck rumbled past, oblivious to his movement. Boone didn't stop walking until he reached the back edge of the bank building. There, hidden behind an array of maintenance panels and old HVAC units, sat a locked employee access door. Beside it, a security camera angled downward but inactive, wires clearly snipped. Boone had known it would be. He had studied this layout days before. He paused at the door and rested a hand on the wall, breathing slowly, not in hesitation, but in focus. He wasn't ready to reveal who he truly was, not yet. That moment would come, and when it did, it would be on his terms, not theirs. For now, he needed to vanish from the scene and let their memory of him begin to fade. That was what they always counted on. That was what systems like this depended upon, that the victims would walk away, too tired or too broken to return. But Boone wasn't gone. He was watching. He was listening. And more importantly, he was remembering. Across the lobby inside the bank, Jerry leaned back in his chair, satisfied. The security logs had been updated. Simone had filed the interaction as a safety intervention without conflict. La was already drafting a memo to brief the team in case a complaint came through. Everyone had moved on. They always did. But Boone hadn't moved on. He had moved deeper. That night, after the bank closed, Boone sat in a modest room on the second floor of an extended stay hotel, surrounded by neatly stacked folders, 2 ruggedized laptops, and a half-empty notebook. He had taken off the coat and hat. In their place was a thin graphite-colored jacket with a stitched logo barely visible on the sleeve. DOFI, Department of Financial Integrity. His cane now rested against the edge of the desk, and beside it sat an ID badge, face down, its clipped edge shining faintly in the lamplight. Boone's fingers moved across the keyboard with unhurried confidence, pulling encrypted files, reviewing time-stamped security footage from banks across 3 states, each showing variations of the same silent violence he had endured. He cataloged their patterns: procedural deactivation of service points, strategic system flags, psychological pressure through indirect confrontation. He highlighted each event, cross-referenced personnel, noted which branches had shared protocols, and which employees rotated between them. His face remained calm, but his eyes were sharp, now focused. The game had shifted. He no longer needed to collect evidence. They had handed it to him on a silver platter. They had documented every humiliating move themselves, submitted every lie through internal systems, certified their cruelty with keystrokes and security logs. Boone reached into his folder and pulled out the hard copy transcript from earlier that day, generated from audio picked up through a secondary device sewn into his jacket's interior seam. Every voice was clear. Every command was time-stamped, even the whisper about mothballs. He placed it beside a growing pile and sat back for a moment, thinking not just about what they had done to him, but what they had done to others, clients who didn't carry credentials, who didn't have federal oversight badges in their wallets, who would leave feeling broken and never return. He couldn't help them all, but he could make this matter. He reached for his phone, not to call, not to text, but to open a secured reporting app tied directly to an internal audit system. One tap and a full report would be filed, but not yet. The morning light was pale, casting long shadows that stretched across the lobby as employees arranged their workstations and logged onto their computers. Boone's cane tapped softly on the polished floor, a steady metronome of determination. He moved deliberately toward the back hallway, bypassing the front desks, where a new wave of customers were being welcomed with practiced smiles and polished professionalism. Boone carried no sign, no badge displayed openly, yet this time, his identity would speak louder than any printed label. He had dressed differently now, wearing a tailored navy jacket and polished shoes that caught the light just so. His movements were purposeful, confident, no longer hesitant or wary. A camera in the upper corner of the lobby, long dormant for Boone's previous visits, suddenly flickered to life, its red recording light blinking as it locked onto his figure. The security monitors at the control station instantly zoomed in, tracking his every step. Inside the security room, Jerry noticed the activation, his fingers pausing over the console in surprise. He glanced toward the monitors and froze as Boone's image filled the screen. Jerry frowned, unsure why the system had re-engaged the facial recognition now. Boone continued walking without hesitation, passing through areas he hadn't dared approach before, his gaze steady. Suddenly, without any command from security personnel, the large LED display screen in the center of the lobby switched on abruptly, grabbing the attention of every employee and customer present. The screen lit up with bold text that unfolded slowly, unignorable. Federal Inspector C8 Clearance Department of Financial Integrity. Below that smaller text read, monitoring racial misconduct in financial institutions, unauthorized discrimination subject under investigation. A hush fell over the room as the employees glanced around, eyes wide and uncertain. Boone stopped beneath the screen, standing straight and unflinching. No one approached him. No one spoke. For a long moment, the entire bank was frozen in silent shock. Then, a voice came from the building's intercom, calm and authoritative, cutting through the tension. This branch is now under federal oversight. All personnel are to remain at their stations and await further instructions. Unauthorized discrimination is a federal offense and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The statement echoed again over the internal speakers, rippling through the rows of desks and offices, leaving no room for doubt. Across the lobby, Renata's face drained of color as she stared at the screen. Lyle's smirk vanished. Jerry's jaw clenched, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. Boone stood quietly, the image of calm authority in sharp contrast to the chaos that his presence now commanded. No one could deny who he was anymore. No one could dismiss him as just another problem client. The security cameras, now streaming live footage to an external federal server, revealed every instance of Boone's earlier treatment: the tripping, the sign, the whispered jokes, the staged training exercises. Each moment played back in high definition on monitors scattered throughout the building, accessible to investigators far beyond this small branch. Employees watched their own behavior reflected back with uncomfortable clarity. The shift was undeniable. The bank, once a fortress of polite exclusion, had become a crucible of exposure. Boone's identity was no longer a secret, yet he remained silent, speaking only through presence. His years of experience, his careful planning, and his understanding of the system's weaknesses had brought him here for this exact moment. This was the reveal without a word, a statement that required no speech, no confrontation, no argument. The power was in the undeniable truth displayed for all to see. In the following minutes, federal agents dressed in plain clothes quietly entered the building, blending in with customers and employees alike. They moved with practiced discretion, securing the premises and beginning a formal investigation. Staff members were directed to gather in a conference room, while Boone was escorted to a private office to debrief. He allowed himself a small, measured nod, a moment of satisfaction that the ordeal was shifting. Yet, he knew the battle was far from over. The reveal was not a conclusion, but the catalyst. The federal agents who had quietly entered began moving swiftly but discreetly, sealing exits and locking down internal doors with electronic swipes that clicked like the final chords of a somber symphony. The bank's usual hum of activity was replaced by a low buzz of confusion and fear. Boone's gaze swept the room, taking in every face. The ones that had looked past him like he was invisible, now wide with shock. The ones that had mocked him, now pale and uncertain. The ones that had ignored him, now stealing anxious glances. The words on the screen hung like a banner of truth. Unauthorized discrimination is a federal offense and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There was no ambiguity, no room for denial. A female agent stepped forward and activated a live feed on the central monitors, playing back the detailed footage Boone had gathered over the previous days. The scenes unfolded. Jerry tripping Boone, the humiliating sign he was forced to hold, the whispered jokes, the staged training exercises that turned him into an unwilling subject to mockery. The room watched, mouths tightening, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, as the undeniable evidence of systemic mistreatment played before them. Renata, the branch manager, sat stiffly, her fingers pressed tightly together, unable to meet Boone's eyes. Lyle and Jerry exchanged uneasy glances, their prior arrogance washed away by the weight of exposure. The agents methodically began interviewing staff, gathering statements, and collecting documents as the investigation took on a life of its own. Boone was escorted to a private conference room where he reviewed the reports compiled from his own files alongside the newly acquired security footage. His expression was stoic, but inside, a quiet satisfaction bloomed. The reveal without a word had forced open a door that years of silence and disregard had kept closed. Outside the building, news vans began to gather, alerted by federal announcements about the ongoing investigation at Wells Meridian. The story had broken. Federal authorities were taking action against racial discrimination within one of the city's prominent financial institutions. The public now had access to undeniable proof of injustice, detailed in chilling clarity through video, internal memos, and testimony. Boone knew that no matter how much the bank tried to spin the narrative or deny culpability, the weight of the evidence would not be dismissed. The system had been caught red-handed. The agents working alongside Boone coordinated with oversight committees and the Department of Justice, ensuring that the bank would face not only administrative sanctions, but potential criminal charges against those responsible. The phrase "no court required" echoed in Boone's mind, not because justice would be swift or easy, but because in this case, the evidence spoke loud enough to forego lengthy debate. The quiet dignity Boone had maintained throughout the ordeal now served as a stark contrast to the unraveling facade of the institution's claimed professionalism. In the days that followed, the bank's leadership scrambled to contain the fallout, holding emergency meetings, drafting public statements filled with apologies that rang hollow to many. The harsh fluorescent lighting cast sharp shadows over the array of blinking consoles and humming machinery as Jerry entered, flanked by two officers who barely concealed their grim expressions. On the giant monitors before them, digital dossiers sprang to life, exposing not just Jerry's actions during Boone's visit, but a history of recorded misconduct. Video clips surfaced, showing Jerry harassing homeless individuals on the street, derogatory emails sent in the dead of night boasting about mistreating clients, and an internal chat group where employees shared racist memes and congratulated each other on keeping the riffraff out. Jerry's smirk faded to a clenched jaw as the evidence piled up, undeniable and overwhelming. The agents detailed the upcoming administrative suspension and potential criminal charges as Jerry listened in stunned silence. Meanwhile, upstairs, Renata faced a similar reckoning. Her office, once a sanctuary of command, was now a scene of forensic scrutiny. Investigators combed through her emails and phone records, uncovering patterns of deliberate neglect, discriminatory hiring practices, and a paper trail of false reports designed to cover up complaints. A growing list of staff complaints filed under pseudonyms over years had been suppressed under her watch. Her network of favors and threats began to unravel thread by thread. Within the Human Resources Department, the junior teller Carly, recently terminated under suspicious circumstances for supporting Boone, was invited to give testimony. Her courage in recounting the humiliations she witnessed and the implicit pressures to conform fueled the investigation's momentum. The bank's internal systems were locked down completely. The IT department, under federal directive, disabled all non-essential functions and began exporting data archives to secure government servers for analysis. This system meltdown was more than a technical shutdown. It was a symbolic severing of control from the corrupt culture that had enabled discrimination to flourish unchecked. Boone observed these developments closely from his secured office, coordinating with federal lawyers and civil rights advocates to ensure the charges were comprehensive and that those responsible could not slip through legal loopholes. The transition was not without resistance. Some employees attempted to erase logs, delete files, or manipulate data timestamps, but federal cybersecurity teams anticipated these moves and blocked attempts in real time. Boone had prepared for this too. Years of experience as a federal inspector had taught him how these institutions protected their worst actors and how to expose them systematically. News of the investigation spread rapidly beyond the walls of Wells Meridian Bank. Local and national media outlets picked up the story, detailing the bank's fall from grace and the allegations of systemic racial discrimination. Social media exploded with calls for accountability and reform. Civil rights groups organized protests and demanded broader industry oversight. Boone's name, once unknown, became synonymous with relentless pursuit of justice, a symbol of dignity reclaimed in the face of institutional abuse. Inside the bank, morale plummeted. Longtime employees who had once ignored or participated in the toxic culture now faced uncertainty and fear. New hires found themselves under intense scrutiny as the institution sought to rebuild its reputation and comply with federal mandates. Corporate leadership, blindsided by the scale of the scandal, scrambled to respond, initiating emergency meetings and hiring consultants to design anti-discrimination training programs. Boone, however, remained focused beyond the immediate crisis. His goal was systemic change, an overhaul of policies, procedures, and cultural norms across all branches where similar patterns might exist. He pushed for comprehensive audits, ongoing oversight, and transparent reporting mechanisms that would make future abuses more difficult to hide. The final chapter of the Wells Meridian Bank saga unfolded not with loud proclamations or grand ceremonies, but with a quiet, unyielding resolve that echoed far beyond the polished floors of the institution itself. months after the federal investigation had exposed the bank's systemic racial discrimination. The building that had once stood as a fortress of exclusion now bore the weight of accountability, its walls silent witnesses to the reckoning within. Boone returned, not as the quietly humiliated man who had first entered, but as a figure of authority and change. This time, he walked through the front doors with an official badge of oversight clipped to his jacket, a symbol of the justice he had tirelessly pursued. Employees greeted him not with suspicion, but with a tentative respect born of recognition and consequence. Boone's presence was a reminder that justice is neither swift nor simple, but when pursued with courage and patience, it reshapes institutions and minds alike. The bank had been shuttered temporarily during the investigation, its leadership replaced, and rigorous reforms instituted. Every staff member, from teller to manager, underwent extensive training focused not only on policy compliance, but on empathy, awareness, and cultural competence. Boone worked closely with the new leadership, ensuring that the lessons learned from the past were integrated deeply into the bank's DNA rather than swept aside as a temporary crisis. He spearheaded the creation of the Boone Ethics and Integrity Program, a permanent initiative designed to monitor customer treatment, handle complaints transparently, and promote diversity and inclusion at every level. The program included anonymous reporting systems, regular audits, and mandatory workshops that challenged biases and systemic barriers. Outside the bank, Boone became a voice for reform in financial institutions nationwide. He spoke at conferences, advised policymakers, and partnered with civil rights organizations to spread awareness about the subtle but damaging effects of institutional discrimination. His story became a beacon for those fighting invisibility and injustice in quiet, everyday spaces. Internally, the bank's culture began to shift, slowly but undeniably. Employees who had once participated in exclusionary practices now found themselves questioning long-held assumptions and habits. New hires were selected with an eye toward diversity and inclusion, and the bank invested in community outreach programs aimed at rebuilding trust with marginalized populations. The physical space of Wells Meridian was also transformed. The lobby's central display no longer flashed warnings, but inspirational quotes about equity and respect. Artwork from local artists of diverse backgrounds adorned the walls, and customer feedback stations encouraged voices that had long been unheard. Boone himself remained vigilant. He knew that progress was never guaranteed, and that the systems that enable injustice could easily reassemble if left unchecked. But he also knew that his experience, once a source of pain and isolation, had become a powerful catalyst for change. One afternoon, as Boone sat quietly in the new ethics office overlooking the bank's bustling lobby, a young woman approached him hesitantly. She was a recent hire, nervous but eager, and she thanked him softly for the work he'd done. "Because of you," she said, "this place feels different, safer, like it belongs to everyone." Boone smiled, the lines on his face softening. He thought about the long journey, from that first moment of silent exclusion to this new chapter of inclusion and accountability. Justice hadn't been a loud proclamation. It had been a steady, relentless tide that reshaped the shore. Boone's story ended not with vengeance, but with hope, a testament that dignity can be reclaimed and institutions can change when challenged by courage and truth. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the buzz of a bank learning to do better, Boone understood the true meaning of justice, not simply to punish the wrong, but to build a world where wrongs no longer find fertile ground. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. What did you think of the plot? Was there a moment that stood out to you? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you.